Hello, Endgame community. I'm Pierre, and welcome to the Fantasy Endgame for baseball. We're going to help you prepare to win in 2022. That's right, fantasy baseball season is coming closer. It looks like the season is probably going to start on time. And so let's get ready for draft prep. And I'm going to tell you some of the players I think you should not pick. I already went over my must-have, some of my favorite players. And now it's time to talk about some pitchers that I absolutely want no part of based on where they're going right now. So let me start with a name that's very familiar, and that is Chris Sale of the Boston Red Sox. So I get it, a former ace, a guy who still, past 30, but 31, still pretty much for a power pitcher of his type, can go for a long time. We've seen guys like Max Scherzer, Justin Verlander go up until almost 40. So why can't Chris Sale do it? Well, there's a difference. He not only coming off an injury last season, but serious injury, Tommy John surgery. He missed all of 2020 and half of 2021. So when he came back, mostly effective, but not quite vintage Chris Sale. So what we saw is his velocity was down a tick, and his strikeout percentage, which is the main asset that he brings to any fantasy team, it was down to 28.4%, which is good, but is not quite ace stuff. Now, I get the fact that obviously coming off that injury with all the time missed, maybe he's not all the way back into form. Maybe next year he will be 100%, and maybe we'll even see the fastball up to where it was before, like 94, 95. But that's assuming a lot because, again, when he was the most dominant was naturally in his prime at age, 27, 28. So this is a guy that now that we've seen him have a lot of injuries to that throwing arm, maybe he just won't be that ace anymore. So I'm not totally opposed to taking him at all, but we can't just ignore the risk here. Also, we have to look at the fact that his whip was down to 1.34, not so great. So he still has the strikeout stuff, but he's somebody who will give up hard contact on occasion. There is risk here, but also I just don't love his ADP. Right now in NFBC high stakes draft, he's going 58 overall. That is way too high for a guy that, look, I'm just not counting on a full rebound. I don't mind taking him within the top 100, but I think a lot of people are just going by name value and just assuming he'll be what he was. I'm not buying into that. It's too rich for me. I'd rather take a guy who's more of an upcoming ace like some of the players I mentioned in my other video. All right, staying in the AL East, let's talk about a guy who's switching from one coast to the other. Formerly with the Giants, Kevin Gausman. Gausman is a guy who's going from one coast to the other, all the way across the country. In fact, to a different country. But going from San Francisco to Toronto, that's not just a change of scenery. That is a big change in park factor. We talk about Oracle Park in San Francisco. That is the park that had the second lowest overall park factor for offenses, which is great for pitching. And it had the lowest home run factor. Looking at StatCast numbers here, 3-year rolling window. San Francisco, it suppresses the long ball because of the wind, because of the way that park is. And so great for pitching, and we've seen that over and over again. And we talk about going to Toronto. We know that's a more offensive-oriented situation here. Rogers Center, 6th highest home run factor. And, of course, in the AL East, a lot more potent offenses. Talking about Boston, the Yankees, always a threat. Look, the Orioles, they do have some bats, all right, there. So this is a league where you're going to see a lot more offense coming from the NL West, where you got to face teams like the Diamondbacks and the Rockies. And let's not forget that Gausman did show significant splits. He was better at home in San Francisco, but also faced a pretty favorable schedule going against some teams with lesser offenses. But this also is a guy who did have his career best season in 2021. Okay, his 2.81 ERA is really good. His previous best ERA was 3.57. I do expect some inflation there with the ratios. He could still pile up some strikeouts. Okay, I think that'll be fine. He should get maybe as many wins if your league still counts wins instead of quality starts for whatever reason. But I think we have to expect some regression here. And the fact that we're drafting basically on what he did last year, we have to look forward and draft based on what we expect this year. And I don't expect the same numbers as last year. So I think going 68 overall is way too high. So I wouldn't say there's no price where I would draft Gausman, but someone will always take him before I will because I am definitely expecting him to decline based on the new situation. All right, so let's go from something old to something new. So Shane McClanahan of the Rays, one of those exciting young names, looked great last year. A lot of those great gifts you saw on Pitching Ninja, and he has great stuff. that's not enough for fantasy. It's all about the counting stats, and you need to have volume in terms of pitching innings and also going out there and lasting within each game if you want to have quality starts or wins. Okay, so the Rays are a great team. There's no denying that. But we know one thing the Rays are good at is rotating players in and out of lineup and shuffling around their pitching staff a lot. Inconsistent roles, guys who get pulled early. McClanahan, being a young pitcher, already poses a risk to not be pushed too far as innings go. McClanahan, well, already experienced that last year as a rookie. He only averaged 78 pitches per start. Okay, for some context, out of all starting pitchers qualified, 120th. What that means is he's not out there for very long. A lot of the guys in similar company to his average length of start are guys that either coming off injury prone, veterans, or rookies who aren't getting pushed too far. I would rather take a guy like Shane Baz, who is going typically a little bit later, but even there's some risk. So McClanahan, great pitcher, but I think for fantasy, he's just being overvalued. All right, so here's a name that has moved up draft boards throughout the offseason, and someone who wasn't even on draft boards at all last year. That's Ranger Suarez of Philadelphia. This is someone who was used initially as a reliever and all of a sudden found a starting gig because, well, injuries, a lot of injuries to the Philadelphia rotation, but also he was really good as a middle reliever, and then he was even better as a starter. He had basically dominant StatCast metrics across the board. I mean, it's a sea of red if you look at his chart there. So his price isn't really too rich, but the thing is, people are going to expect him to be a nice trendy sleeper, continue what he did last year. You can't buy too much into it because just like we kind of throw out the 2020 stats because small sample size, right? Weird season. Well, last season was a little more normal, but you know what? He has a pretty small sample size as a starter. Like I said, started the year as a reliever and was great. And then when he was dominant as a starter, it was just the second half of the season. All told, 65 innings worth as a starter. That's not something that we want to buy too much into. Is he going to be able to carry that on? Is he going to rack up as many as 150 innings this year? It's possible he doesn't. So they might need him as a reliever again. He's a guy that if he gets hit a couple of times, might get moved out of that starting spot. He doesn't have great stuff. He just doesn't. 93 mile per hour fastball, and his movement is actually negative as far as his vertical movement on that fastball. He's not fooling hitters. He did a great job mixing up his pitches. And again, not taking away from last season's stats, he was great. But I'm just not assuming it's going to happen again. He's a guy, I don't mind taking the back end of my draft, but I guarantee someone will take him a lot sooner than I will. So I'm not putting him on my draft board. And then my last avoid guy, I just don't want any part of in fantasy. I know that he's not as trendy a sleeper anymore, but somebody will want to take a chance on Chris Paddack in San Diego. Look, you know, as a rookie coming up, he had a nice little run. I know people like the whole cowboy thing. That's great. He's got the look. He's got the physique. He's got a nice changeup. But that's about it. Look, this is a guy who relies mainly on two pitches. He's mixing a curveball. He's got 3-pitch repertoire, but he's just not effective enough with any of them. He relies way too much on the fastball. He throws it 60% of the time, and it's not an excellent fastball. All right, that fastball has been hit to the tune of a 300 or higher batting average each of the last 2 seasons. Okay, so when you don't have enough other pitches to fool hitters, if they know when that fastball is coming, they can wait and they can tee off on it. And that's just what's happened. So he's been pulled in and out of the rotation. There's really no reason to expect much changing here. The only thing he really was good at last year was limiting walks. All right, so he didn't kill himself too much, but he didn't need to because the other batters were killing him enough. Okay, Paddack is a guy I just don't see much hope for in turning things around. He might be okay as a back-end rotation piece for the Padres in real life just to eat up some innings, but he's not going to help you in fantasy. The strikeout rate just isn't high enough, so I think you can just pretty much avoid him at all costs. All right, those are my pitchers that I am avoiding this draft season. I'm going to talk about some hitters too, so don't miss that video. And of course, check out the must-have players you should be drafting wherever possible. We're here to help you win all offseason long in fantasy baseball and football. Keep it tuned here to the end game.